I've been driving trucks for years, long enough that the miles don't register anymore. Long enough that the road feels more like home than any place I've ever lived. I've hauled just about everything: freight, livestock, tankers, machinery, across highways that stretch longer than my patience and through backroads so empty you forget the rest of the world exists. It's a lonely life, but I chose it, and I live by the rules of the road. Keep your rig steady, respect the weight you're carrying, and never push harder than the conditions allow. That night, I was headed west, cutting through the badlands of New Mexico, running empty after a delivery in Texas. The road was mine alone, just me and the endless stretch of asphalt disappearing into the horizon. My next stop was a fuel station a couple hundred miles out, a place where I could stretch my legs, refill my thermos with burnt gas station coffee, maybe swap a few words with another driver before pressing on. I wasn't in a rush. No deadlines. No dispatcher breathing down my neck. Just the rhythm of the wheels and the storm rolling in behind me. Driving through the barren expanse of New Mexico, the land stretched endlessly in all directions, a wasteland of sculpted rock and shifting sand, untouched by even the hardiest of plants. The misty wilderness loomed like something ancient and forgotten, its melted rock formations twisting into grotesque shapes, frozen in time under the weight of an indifferent sky. The road ahead shimmered under the oppressive, rain-choked dusk, the sky a dull bruise of swirling clouds, rolling in with the fury of an unrelenting monsoon. It wasn't just raining, it was an all-consuming deluge, a torrential assault that reduced visibility to mere feet. Water sheeted across the windshield, wipers thrashing helplessly against the downpour. The wind howled through the desolation, rattling the car like unseen hands trying to pry it from the road. The storm did not ease, nor did it offer a moment's reprieve. Instead, it escalated, swelling into something primal, something furious. It was no longer just rain, it was a war being waged from the heavens, a violent reckoning unleashed upon the barren land. The darkness above churned, thick and oppressive, its swirling mass split apart by vicious, jagged streaks of lightning that seared the sky in relentless succession. The thunder followed, not in distant, rolling echoes, but in deafening, bone-rattling detonations that felt as though the very atmosphere was being torn apart. The force of each strike seemed to shake the earth itself, reverberating through the rock formations, making them feel less like ancient sentinels and more like fragile monoliths poised to collapse under the sheer violence of the storm. The weather had been building all day, slow and ominous, creeping in like a warning. I'd seen the clouds thickening in my mirrors, the air growing heavy with the scent of rain, but I figured I could beat it. I was wrong. By the time I hit the outskirts of the misty badlands, the sky had cracked open, dumping rain so fast and hard that my wipers might as well have been decoration. The wind howled through the empty land, rattling the rig, pushing against the trailer, trying to drag me off the road. I slowed down, squinting through the downpour, gripping the wheel with a little more care. I've driven through storms before, but this one had a different kind of weight to it. Something unnatural in the way it moved, in the way the wind twisted and screamed through the empty stretches of rock. Lightning split the sky in jagged streaks, turning the landscape into something surreal, flashing shadows across the alien formations that lined the road. The badlands looked alive in those moments, shifting under the bursts of light, silent and watching. Then, as if some unseen force had commanded it, the rain transformed. The downpour thickened, its drops hardening midair, turning into ice. What had been sheets of water became a relentless barrage of hailstones, each one striking with brutal intent. The sound was immediate, overpowering, the roof of the car a drum under the merciless assault, the windshield shuddering as if it might cave under the ceaseless pounding. The road, slick and treacherous only moments before, became a shifting battlefield of ice, every pebble-sized chunk ricocheting off the asphalt with sharp, erratic force. Visibility shrank to almost nothing, the world outside reduced to a flickering chaos of white streaks and silver flashes, each illuminated for a fraction of a second before vanishing into the howling dark. The headlights were useless, their beams swallowed by the storm, their glow reflecting off the swirling mist and ice like ghostly tendrils reaching for something unseen. There was nothing beyond them, no landmarks, no roadside markers, no sign that this road had ever been touched by anything human. It was as if the land had been abandoned by time itself, left to the mercy of a storm that had no beginning and no end. The weight of it pressed down, thick and suffocating, a silence beneath the chaos that felt unnatural. There were no trees bending under the force of the wind, no distant lights flickering through the darkness, no evidence that anything had ever existed beyond this lonely stretch of road. Just the highway, a thin, winding scar through a dead and forgotten world, disappearing into the merciless void ahead. Then, as the narrow, winding road curved sharply through the desolate rockscape, the entire world shifted in an instant. A moment ago, there had been nothing but the suffocating weight of the storm, blinding rain, relentless hail, the oppressive darkness pressing in from all sides. But now, as the bend unfolded before me, the landscape erupted into something raw, something nightmarish, something that did not belong in the logical order of the world. It was on fire. Not a mere flicker of rebellious flames sputtering weakly against the suffocating downpour, not the distant glow of a controlled burn slowly licking at the edges of the desolate terrain. No, this was something far greater, something violent and all-consuming. This was an inferno unleashed, a feral beast of fire tearing across the land with unchecked fury, stretching endlessly toward the blurred horizon in all directions. The blaze did not simply exist, it thrived, swallowing the barren earth in its merciless grip, its scorching tendrils leaping madly across the jagged landscape, engulfing rock and sand alike with terrifying ease. The storm, for all its unrelenting brutality, seemed powerless against the monstrous flames. Rain poured in sheets so thick they should have drowned even the most stubborn embers, yet the fire refused to bow. It raged against the deluge, its searing breath rising defiantly against the suffocating weight of the storm, crackling with an intensity that rivaled the thunder itself. The flames did not cower or flicker, they roared, an unbroken chorus of destruction, standing in open defiance of the very elements that should have subdued them. The contrast was staggering, unnatural in its brutality. Above, the sky was a churning abyss, black clouds splitting apart in violent bursts of lightning, the atmosphere alive with fury. Below, the land was an open wound, seething, writhing, as if fire had been poured into its very bones. The rain and the blaze clashed in a chaotic, senseless war, one meant to snuff the other out, yet neither yielding. It was destruction in its purest form, raw and untamed, an elemental battle unfolding across the forsaken landscape, and the only thing standing between them was the thin, fragile stretch of road that I was forced to follow. It was incomprehensible, an affront to everything that should have been possible. The land was a wasteland of stone and dust, stripped bare of anything that could serve as kindling, yet the flames raged unchecked, climbing hungrily toward the sky, their scorching tendrils reaching into the storm as though defying its very existence. The fire did not simply burn, it consumed, its searing tongues of orange, yellow, and white-hot fury writhing in chaotic waves, twisting and stretching across the barren terrain with a monstrous life of their own. The wet pavement, slick with rain, mirrored the inferno's madness, distorting its shapes into ghostly, shifting apparitions that flickered and danced across the surface like reflections in shattered glass. The heat was unbearable, an oppressive force that pressed in from all sides, sinking through the car's windows, coiling around my chest, tightening, suffocating. Even through the relentless downpour, the air inside thickened with blistering warmth, carrying with it the choking, acrid scent of burning chemicals, a stench so sharp it clawed at the back of my throat. But there was something else beneath it, something darker, an undercurrent of scorched metal, of ruptured machinery turned to smoldering wreckage, of destruction so absolute it left no room for life. A grotesque contradiction unfolded before me. The fire blazed with an unrelenting hunger, devouring everything in sight, turning rock and sand into a seething landscape of molten ruin, while above, the storm howled its fury, dumping endless torrents of water in a futile attempt to extinguish the inferno. They waged war against each other with relentless brutality, a battle without victors, a chaos so vast it swallowed the very concept of reason. The mind rejected it outright, recoiling from the sheer impossibility of what lay before me. This should not be happening. There was no logic, no rational explanation for flames to surge so violently beneath the crushing weight of the storm, for the rain to fall in thick, merciless sheets yet do nothing to smother the fire's rage. It was as if the very earth had been waiting to burn, indifferent to nature's laws, immune to the forces that should have restrained it. The land was not merely on fire, it was consumed, indifferent to the rain, oblivious to reason, locked in its own unrelenting destruction. There was no choice but to press on. The road, slick with rain and illuminated by the eerie, flickering glow of the flames stretched forward as the only path through the inferno. There was no safe retreat, no side road to slip away onto, no refuge from the chaos that had swallowed the landhole. Every instinct screamed to stop, to turn back, to find another way, but there was no other way. The only escape was forward, through the heart of the devastation. The car inched ahead, its tires struggling for traction on the treacherous pavement, every motion tense, controlled, deliberate. The heat intensified with each passing second, pressing against the windows like an invisible force, creeping into the cabin, thick and suffocating despite the rain hammering down in unrelenting sheets. The air shimmered with the distorted mirage of fire against wet asphalt, reflections twisting unnaturally in the rivulets of water streaming across the road. The wipers battled the storm, slashing back and forth, barely managing to clear the windshield before being drenched again in an instant. Every inch forward felt like a descent into something deeper, something worse. And then, through the smoke, through the swirling vortex of rain and flame, something shifted. A shape, barely visible through the seething haze, flickered at the very edge of perception. A trick of the firelight? A fractured illusion in the heat waves? The mind, already raw from adrenaline and disbelief, latched onto the possibility that it was nothing more than a cruel distortion, a phantom born from exhaustion and sensory overload. But it wasn't. Something was there, just beyond the chaotic veil of flames, just past the undulating curtain of heat and smoke. It was real, solid, unmoving. The wreckage of a truck, or at least what little remained of it. Not immediately visible, obscured by rock formations and fire, but unmistakable in its destruction. The metal carcass had twisted in ways that defied physics, its frame wrenched apart as if some great force had ripped it open from the inside. The heat shimmered around it, distorting the air, making it impossible to tell whether anything remained inside. Whether anyone remained inside. The realization struck like a blade, sharp and merciless, carving through the haze of shock with a sudden, visceral clarity. A rush of guilt coiled in my gut, a heavy weight pressing down on my chest, tangled with an unshakable unease that seeped into every nerve. Should I stop? Should I get out? Should I try to help? The question surged, frantic and insistent, colliding with the reality of the chaos that surrounded me. The instinct to act, to do something, anything, flared for a brief, agonizing moment. But just as quickly, it was swallowed by something deeper, something primal, something that knew the brutal truth: stopping here was not an option. The flames were too high, the heat too intense, the air too thick with choking fumes. The fire had already taken everything, leaving behind only ruin and ash. The wreckage was crumpled beyond recognition, twisted metal bathed in liquid flame, the very ground beneath it searing with unnatural heat. Even if someone had been alive in that truck when it first overturned, could they have survived this long? And if they had, if by some impossible chance there was still breath in their lungs, what could I do against this kind of destruction? There was no heroism here, no chance to save the unsavable. The fire was absolute, a force beyond human intervention, beyond control. There was nothing left to salvage, nothing left to reach for. The only choice, was to keep moving, to leave the devastation behind, to push forward before the inferno swallowed even the road beneath my tires. The answer arrived not as a thought, not as reasoned logic, but as a sudden and violent detonation, a seismic rupture in the chaos that made decisions for me. A deep, guttural boom ripped through the air, reverberating through the bones of the earth itself, a sound so massive it felt as though the very atmosphere had been torn apart. The shockwave slammed into the car with a force that rattled every joint and bolt, the windows shuddering under the pressure, the steering wheel jerking in my grip. Then came the fire, an eruption so violent, so absolute, that for a moment, the very air seemed to shudder beneath its force. A massive detonation, deeper and more guttural than thunder, split the night apart, a hollow, concussive blast that reverberated through the bones of the land itself. The propane had ignited again, its volatile fury unleashed in an instant, an entire tank of compressed gas surrendering to the blaze in one catastrophic explosion. The impact sent a tidal wave of heat and force outward in every direction, a pressure so immense that it rattled the windows of my truck, slamming against the metal like an invisible wrecking ball. The flames, already unrelenting, were reborn with terrifying new life, surging upward in a column of pure destruction, twisting, expanding, devouring. The sheer force of the blast momentarily shoved the rain backward, scattering the downpour in midair, distorting its path as though the fire itself had gained dominion over the storm. For a fraction of a second, the world seemed to hesitate, locked in an impossible moment where the natural order of things had fractured, where fire ruled even over water. Then the inferno roared, a deafening, primal sound that drowned out everything else, a beast of heat and chaos, its searing tendrils clawing violently at the sky. The flames did not flicker, did not waver, they reached, stretched, hungry for more, their blistering edges tearing through the rain-soaked night as if trying to consume the storm itself. The heat pulsed like a living thing, radiating outward in waves so intense they blurred the air, distorting the landscape, bending the very fabric of the world around them. The fire was no longer just burning, it was consuming. The sheer, unforgiving violence of it tore away any trace of doubt, crushing hesitation beneath the weight of its raw, unrelenting force. There was no pause, no second chance to reconsider, no moment to reflect on the what-ifs or the maybes. The time for decision-making had been stripped away, burned to ash in the inferno behind me. This was not a place for uncertainty, not a place for hesitation or misplaced bravery. This was a place ruled by destruction, where hesitation was a death sentence, where the only law that mattered was motion, forward, away, out. Survival was the only instinct left. The body took over where the mind faltered. I gripped the wheel tighter, my fingers locking around it like a vice, knuckles stark white against the darkened interior. Every muscle tensed, every nerve wired into the act of escape. I pressed harder on the accelerator, urging the truck forward, forcing it to obey, to carry me away from the hell rising behind me. The tires struggled for traction on the rain-slicked pavement, fighting against the opposing forces of water and fire, but I didn't let up. There was no slowing down, no looking back, no consideration for anything other than the road that stretched ahead. The truck lurched forward with a jolt, the tires momentarily skimming across the rain-slicked pavement, hydroplaning for a fraction of a second before regaining their tenuous grip on the treacherous, shifting road. The weight of the rig strained against the elements, caught between forces that had no business coexisting: fire and water, destruction and survival. The storm and the inferno waged their merciless war on either side, locked in a battle that defied reason, neither element yielding to the other, neither willing to be subdued. The wind roared like a living thing, a monstrous, unseen force tearing across the open land, shrieking through the emptiness, trying to push me off course, trying to wrench control from my hands. Sheets of rain battered against the windshield, hammering down in relentless torrents, turning the world into a shapeless blur of water and shadow. The wipers, struggling against the deluge, barely managed to carve brief windows of clarity before the storm swallowed them again. Visibility was near zero, the landscape dissolving into a distorted mess of streaking water and flickering fire, the headlights reflecting off the slick road like ghostly apparitions guiding me deeper into the unknown. But behind me, the fire refused to die. It crawled at the edges of the highway, searing through the darkness, molten tongues of orange and white-hot fury flickering in the mirrors, their presence a relentless reminder of how close destruction had come. The flames twisted and snapped like a thing enraged, licking at the storm, stretching outward as if trying to chase me, to reach beyond the confines of the wreckage that had birthed them. Only as the distance widened did they begin to shrink, their grasp weakening, their reflection fading against the rain-streaked glass. And still, I didn't slow down. Couldn't. The road ahead was a void, an empty, endless black ribbon stretching into the unknown. But at least it wasn't burning. The road, slick and black, slashed through the chaos like a raw, gaping wound torn across the earth, a scar carved deep into the tortured remains of a landscape consumed by fire and storm. It was the only way out, the only thread of sanity left in the overwhelming madness, a single, unbroken path leading away from devastation and into something else, something quieter, but no less ominous. The horizon swallowed it whole, an endless stretch of pavement vanishing into the void, a chasm of unknown miles dissolving into the pitch-black abyss of the night. There was nothing beyond it. No guiding lights on the horizon, no distant glow of gas stations or rest stops, no signs of human presence to break the suffocating isolation. Just asphalt slick with rain, glistening under the dying flashes of lightning, disappearing into the oppressive dark. The highway felt less like a road and more like a boundary, a narrow bridge suspended between two worlds, the one I was leaving behind, still burning, still raging, and the one ahead, silent, empty, waiting. Time twisted, unraveling into something uncertain, elastic. The moment no longer felt real. The mind flailed for logic, for an explanation that would make sense of the impossible, but there was none. How? The thought repeated itself in a loop, desperate, grasping. How could fire burn where there was nothing to fuel it? How could a storm of this magnitude fail to drown it? Where was the wreckage? There should have been something, some shattered remnant of the truck, some twisted remains of metal to prove it had been there. But the flames had obscured everything, swallowing the evidence, leaving only destruction in their wake. The highway stretched on, mile after mile, until at last, the storm lost its fury. The thunder faded into the distance, the lightning grew sparse, the relentless downpour softened into a weary drizzle, the last remnants of the sky's rage. But even as the world quieted, even as the road ahead became just another desolate stretch of asphalt through the vast, indifferent landscape, the weight of it all lingered. It pressed into my chest, heavy and unshakable, an unease that would not lift, a feeling that I had driven through something beyond disaster, something raw, something violent, something that should not have been. News confirmed what my eyes had already witnessed but what my mind had refused to fully process. The words on the screen were cold, clinical, stripped of the sheer horror of what had happened. Veteran truck driver James Holloway, 46, lost control of his vehicle late last night in extreme weather conditions along a remote stretch of highway in the Bisty Badlands. Authorities believe excessive speed, combined with heavy rain and poor visibility, contributed to the accident. The report made it sound simple, like a tragic but explainable sequence of events, as if reducing it to cause and effect could contain the magnitude of destruction that had unfolded. The reality was anything but simple. The weight of the truck, the sheer force of its momentum, and the treacherous slick of rain-drenched asphalt had conspired against him in one brutal, irreversible instant. The rig had veered, its enormous frame tilting, then twisting violently, fighting against physics before finally succumbing to the inevitable. Holloway's truck skidded for nearly 100 yards before careening off the shoulder. The vehicle overturned with catastrophic force, the impact shearing through the reinforced frame, causing the propane tanker to rupture. I could see it now, clear as if I had been watching it unfold in real time, the cabin whipping sideways, the weight of the trailer pulling the entire rig into chaos. Metal crumpling under its own immense burden, glass shattering, steel folding in on itself like paper in the face of sheer, unstoppable momentum. And then, the worst of it. Officials say the propane leak was near instantaneous. The escaping gas, highly flammable, ignited within moments of exposure to open air. A cloud of invisible death spilling out into the storm, spreading unseen, creeping through the rain before the first spark turned it all to hell. Witnesses reported seeing flames reach nearly 40 feet into the sky. Firefighters arriving on the scene struggled to contain the blaze, which burned intensely despite heavy rainfall. 40 feet. Higher than a house. Higher than any fire had a right to be in a storm like that. And yet, I had seen it, I had driven through it, had felt its heat pressing through my windshield like something alive. I had watched the storm's fury beat down on it, yet failed to smother its rage. There, in black and white, were the facts. The truck, the crash, the propane igniting on impact. The driver, James Holloway, who had been behind the wheel, headed west on a route he'd likely driven dozens of times before, unaware that this would be his last haul. The report ended with the inevitable. Holloway did not survive. A neat, concise conclusion to something that had been anything but. But I had been there. I had seen the fire that refused to die, the impossible devastation left in its wake. And the weight of that truth would not leave me. The driver had not survived. There had never been a chance. The fire had burned with a fury that defied comprehension, an all-consuming, merciless inferno fueled by the very cargo meant to propel the vehicle forward. The explosion had been instant, violent beyond measure, turning steel into molten ruin, reducing rubber and glass to nothing more than blackened remnants scattered across the scorched ground. Flames had raced across the barren expanse, leaping hungrily, swallowing everything in their reach, stretching outward as if determined to leave no trace of what had once been. The wreckage had been hidden, swallowed by the jagged formations of rock, cloaked in the thick, suffocating veil of smoke and the chaotic swirl of flame and storm. That was why I hadn't seen it at first, why, in the blinding chaos, the fire had seemed so unnatural, so unmoored from logic. There had been no familiar landmarks, no twisted frame jutting from the wreckage, no shattered windshield reflecting the flickering glow of the inferno. Just fire erupting from the ground itself, as though the land had split open and hell had risen to the surface. But it had been there. Buried beneath the weight of its own destruction, obscured by the violent dance of heat and rain, lost in the suffocating haze of smoke and steam. The truck had been there. The driver had been there. And now nothing remained. I told myself there was nothing I could have done. I repeated it like a mantra, forcing the words into my mind, willing them to settle, to take root. The fire had been too intense, the storm too violent, the wreckage too far gone. By the time I had arrived, the damage had already been done. The explosion, the inferno, the sheer destruction, it had all unfolded long before my headlights had cut through the darkness. It wasn't my fault. I hadn't caused it. I hadn't ignored some desperate cry for help. I was just a man passing through, a witness to something I was never meant to see. But that logic did little to ease the weight in my chest. Because no matter how many times I told myself there was no saving him, the question still lingered, festering in the back of my mind like an open wound. What if I had stopped? What if I had pulled over the moment I saw the flames, climbed out into the storm, and fought my way toward the wreckage? What if, somewhere in that chaos, he had still been alive, trapped but breathing, waiting for a miracle that never came? Had he been conscious in those final moments? Had he been calling out, struggling against twisted metal, hoping, praying that someone would come? I had seen something move in the fire. Just a flicker, a shape barely visible through the shifting wall of heat and rain. At the time, I had dismissed it as a trick of the light, a hallucination brought on by adrenaline and exhaustion. But now, in the quiet aftermath, my mind latched onto that moment, replaying it over and over again. Was it the wind tossing debris through the air? A stray reflection from my headlights against the wet, burning wreckage? Or had it been him, trying to escape, trying to make it to the road to me before the fire took him for good? The truth was something I would never know. No report, no investigation, no logical explanation could tell me whether stopping that night would have changed anything. But knowing that didn't absolve me. It didn't erase the guilt that curled in my gut, whispering that maybe, just maybe, I had driven away from something I could have stopped. Maybe I had left a man to die alone in the fire. Or maybe I had only saved myself. The story would fade, as all stories do. The wreckage would be hauled away in the dead of night, stripped down to unrecognizable scraps, loaded onto trucks, and driven off to be buried in some salvage yard where no one would ever think to look for it again. The charred remains of the truck, the twisted steel of the cab, the blackened skeleton of what had once been a machine built for the open road, it would all disappear, erased as if it had never been there at all. The highway would bear its scars for a while, scorched patches of asphalt and fractured guardrails serving as faint echoes of the chaos that had unfolded, but time would smooth them over. The wind would sweep away the last flecks of ash, the rain would wash the soot into the cracks of the earth, and eventually, the land would reclaim itself, indifferent to what had burned upon it. One day, another driver would pass that same stretch of highway and see nothing unusual, just another lonely road slicing through the emptiness of the badlands. No signs of fire, no remnants of destruction, no trace of what had happened. Just silence. As if the storm, the fire, the explosion, the man who had lost his life, it had all been nothing more than a fleeting disturbance, swallowed whole by the vastness of the desert. But I knew better. Some things, once seen, never leave you. Some moments burn themselves so deeply into the mind that they remain long after everything else has faded. They linger in the quiet, in the dark spaces between thoughts, waiting for the right moment to rise again. And even now, long after the flames have died and the storm has passed, I still see it. I see the wreckage lying twisted and broken, its massive frame crumpled like paper beneath the weight of its own destruction. I see the fire, raging against the drowning sky, an impossible inferno that refused to die even as the heavens poured their fury down upon it. I see the road, slick with rain, stretching forward through it all, a fragile lifeline leading me away from something I could never fully comprehend, something I will never be able to forget.